Hello, and welcome to our installment of 7 powerful questions that elicit useful information. Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's Shondell here from Life Puzzle. I'm super pumped and really excited to bring you a bunch of information around how do we get better results with the clients and the prospects that we're engaging with. And there are 7 powerful questions that I teach my clients that allow them to actually elicit information that is useful, that helps them to ascertain what are the key needs of their prospect or their audience or their existing clients that can help to foster deeper relationships, better trust in the communication, and effectively create win-win-win outcomes. So if you've ever been in a situation where perhaps maybe you're not getting the traction or the follow-through that you want with your customers or your prospects, or you've ever found that sometimes when you're in a sales conversation that people object and give you reasons why it won't work for them, or perhaps why it doesn't seem like they're going to get a return on investment, then this is definitely the session for you. So welcome everybody. We're going to go through these 7 powerful questions that implement or that elicit this powerful information that will help you to create win-win-win organization deals with the people that you're interacting with and the prospects that you have. But before we get into that, I think it's really important, if you're watching this live on my page and you'd like access to the workbooks and the worksheets that we're going to be working through today, then go ahead and just comment below worksheet or workbook, and we will make sure that we get that information out to you. If you're watching on my page, then there's a button below that actually just sends you to get access to these workbooks and to the materials that I'm sharing with you here today. But before we get into all of that, I think a lot of the time we want to be able to create win-win outcomes. We want to create deeper level relationships with our prospects and with our clients. And sometimes it can feel like we're pushing boulders uphill in terms of eliciting the information that we need that's going to help us to create a scalable solution, a profitable solution for our audience. And certainly I've noticed in the last 10 to 15 years that our buyers are very discerning, and a lot of people know what it is that they want, and they often won't have those needs and those expectations met when they're meeting with sales professionals from different organizations. And so I think that, you know, the sales process, I certainly think that the sales process over a number of years has shifted and changed, and our buyers are more discerning now. There is so much opportunity and so many choices available to people, and often people aren't comparing as prospects. They're not comparing apples with apples, and there's a lot of sales professionals, business development managers, and sales managers that are out there trying to produce results, or certainly leading their team to get results, and yet they're met with resistance. And so for this reason, I want to bring to you today these 7 powerful questions that I use in order to elicit useful information in the process of creating excellence with our clients and with our buyers and our prospects. And so as I walk through this today, the first and foremost, or the first point that I want to make to you is that a lot of the time when I meet with sales professionals, they tell me about the fact that they want to sell people into their ideas. And while I'm a big fan of the concept of selling and meeting needs with expectations and making sure that we're creating opportunities for people to interact with each other, get win-win outcomes, I'm certainly not a big fan of, if you followed me for a little while, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of, hardcore back people into a corner, manipulative sales tactics. And so, if that's the kind of thing that you like to do, then this video is definitely not for you. And what I do know is that a lot of people tend to get nervous or reserved about what they should say in sales conversations. People get caught up in, is it that I should be saying this set of words, or should I use this script, or when I use that script I got a challenge, or people are not buying, right? And so I think one of the key things that I'd like to share with you today is the fact that people actually don't want to be sold, but they do want to buy in. And so the quality of the information that we prepare for them and the way in which we present it will be the difference that makes a difference. And so when people are looking for the solution that they want, they're often, feeling a pressure to be sold to, or feeling a pressure that they need to see things from a salesperson's point of view. And so what people really want is they want to buy in to the proposition that is going to serve them. And so when we look at them buying into a proposition that is going to serve them, I put the emphasis on the word them, because often I will see sales professionals walk into organizations situations where they might have a ready-made qualified buyer and they find themselves being so interesting and they're so caught up in how they're going to position themselves as being better than their competitors, as being, you know, the best in the marketplace, and they find themselves really talking about the stuff that they do and how awesome they are, when they forget that ultimately that conversation is really about the needs and the expectations of the person on the other side of the table. And so if you take nothing else away from this workshop, I really want for you to remember that people don't want to be sold, they want to buy in. And it's your job to be able to elicit the information and present the options to them that will allow them to buy into what serves them as opposed to what serves your agenda as the sales professional. At the end of the day, your prospect really doesn't care about how many deals you have on the board. They really don't care about the commissions that you're going to be making or not making. They care about what is the challenge that's in front of them and how does your solution or what you're offering them actually solve that problem for you. For them, sorry, and that is an important focus in terms of what we're actually doing when we're in front of these prospects and creating that opportunity. And so, one of the things that I really wanted to highlight for you today is that you know, when we look at what we're connecting in terms of our languaging and what we're proposing in the way that we interact with our audience, is that our prepared scripts will never actually get more than 30% closing rate. And it may actually be a surprise to you to actually learn that while I'm a big fan of how we can scale our sales process and make sure that it's replicable, what we often forget is that the person that's sitting in front of us may have different needs, may have different buying cues, they may have different desires. And if we're trying to create a canned approach, then often we hit a ceiling. So you may have more consistency in terms of having pre-prepared scripts and dialogues, but ultimately at the end of the day, in my experience and all the different organizations that I've coached and trained over the years in their sales and scaling their sales process, our scripts that are prepared and canned will only ever produce a maximum of a 30% closing ratio, because we're only taking into account a third of the audience that's actually going to connect with that. And so I think what we really need to remember is that every buyer that's in front of us, although they may have similarities as per our client avatar, they may have similar problems or pain points, they may have similar cues for what led them to actually buy from you, they're not necessarily the same person. And as many of you know, I'm a master trainer of neuro-linguistic programming, and so we bring a lot of psychology into the way that we interact with people. Understanding the psychology of our buyers is a really important part, hence the 7 questions that help us to elicit really powerful information that we can utilize in the context of creating a win-win-win outcome. And so it brings me to you know, just to share with you guys a conversation that I had with a lady who was a prospect of mine probably about 3 weeks ago. And it was so interesting because we had a conversation about what was working in her sales process, what was not working in her sales process, and what she wanted to do to be able to affect some change to increase her conversion ratio. And we were actually talking to her about our Confident Conversion 90 Days to More Cash, More Clients and More Impact, which is a program that we run where people actually take their closing ratio sometimes from 15 to 20% all the way up to 80 and 85% in the space of, say, 4 to 6 weeks within the program. And so I was having a chat with her, and I quickly asked some of these questions that I'm going to share with you, and found out that one of the biggest challenges in what was going on for her was the fact that she was not paying attention to what the needs of the buyer was. She was mostly thinking about her own agenda, her own product, her own service, how that could help the buyer, and really just focusing in on the what's in it from me for us from a salesperson's perspective. And as we know, when we get interested, that's much more powerful than trying to be interesting. And so I encouraged her to actually have a look at her ideal client avatar, which if you haven't seen that tool, we actually have in our NLP Sales Mastery Academy. There is access to one of our tools, which is the Define, Align, Deliver resource, which helps you to really pinpoint and nail a lot of the elements around what is your ideal client and how can you reduce the amount of efforting that you're doing with, you know, connecting with the people who really want to buy from you. But as I was chatting to her about this ideal client avatar, I said, you know, what are some of their pain points? What are some of the challenges that they're experiencing? What are the things that they really struggle with? And how can you find out that information? And your audience may have similarities in that. And I said, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go away, watch this resource and put into place a number of different things around that. And we were having a follow-up call to see the progress that she'd made. And what was really interesting was that when I asked her some questions, we got together again and I asked her some questions about what she'd learnt about her ideal client. Unfortunately, she hadn't watched the resource yet. There was some confusion about that. And so she'd just gone ahead and looked at the similarities of her buyers. And as she reeled them off to me, I noticed that all of them were focused on what the benefit was to her as opposed to the benefit to the client or the needs of the client. And so I really want to highlight here and really emphasize the point that what we're really looking for here is to put ourselves in the shoes of the buyer, to be able to elicit the information that's going on for the shoes of the buyer. And so when we talk about the scripts that we have and the issues that come up with canned scripts, is that often we're only limiting the information that we share to a small amount of the audience, and you're going to have a 30% follow through rate that's actually going to connect with the people that you're wanting to chat with. And so when you have these powerful questions, you'll get up to, when you go off script, you'll get up to 100% or more. And you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, well, Shondell, how can you get more than 100% in your closing ratio? And the truth is that we've had organizations that we've worked with, including my own personal closing ratio, where you might have a prospect in front of you and you may have, thought that they were going to buy a particular product, and then they invest in additional products that you weren't expecting them to, and therefore, potentially making referrals, or there could be more deals that are actually happening within that organization. And so when we go off book, when we actually go outside of the scripts and dialogues that so many of us are compelled to look towards, and don't get me wrong, it's great to have a basis, but I think that in the way in which we do our sales conversations, it's really important for us to understand the people that are in front of us, what their needs are, and how we can best meet our needs. In fact, I often say that there's 5 steps to sales success, and that is to build trust, ask really great quality questions, find their need in their words from their model of the world and their perspective. We want to then look at how we can create a match or a link between what we have to offer and what their pain points and problems are, what the gains are that we want to help them to experience. And then, of course, to actually take that conversation to the next level of whatever that is in your sales steps. Now, the process is to then close. And for some of you, I know that we've got a lot of people in our community that perhaps maybe have transactional type sales where you might have 1 or 2 meetings where you can get a deal across the line. But we've also got a lot of people in our community who are doing multi-million-dollar deals, and so therefore their sales cycle, or the way in which they do a deal, might be multiple meetings over a 6 to 12 month period, and in some cases up to 18 months and 2 years. So one of the really key things about the word close and the step of closing is that we want to close the next action. So let's have a look at the difference between the quality of our conversations versus leading questions. I attended a meeting one time where I was the buyer, and the sales professional came to talk to me about some options, and they asked a bunch of questions that I was able to ascertain were off a script. And those questions were ultimately what I call leading questions. And so they were trying to lead the questions to the places where they wanted to actually, effectively back me into a corner so that I definitely had, they could pitch the stuff that they wanted to pitch to me. Now, not only did this feel kind of icky and sleazy and gross in that process, because I told you, buyers are more discerning these days. They know what it is that they want, and they also are awake to some of those old hat, old school sales tactics, and they're not interested in that anymore. And so I urge you to actually get interested in your audience instead of offering these canned questions where your buyer can see that you're just trying to back them into a corner. And so I attended this meeting. I was being asked all of these canned questions. And, if you've known me for a little while and you've followed some of my things, you know that one of my most despised questions, if you like, is that question where people ask you, what sorts of things keep you up at night? Well, in the context of what I'm being asked today, that doesn't seem in context. And so I think that you want to be more creative in the way that you ask what I call open-ended questions. And our open-ended questions allow the person to give you the information that is front and center for them around what relates to what's going on in their day-to-day. And so as we go into this a little bit further, I just want to share for some of you that may not be familiar that the way in which we process information is actually, through the 5 senses. And so it's the visual information that we see, the auditory information, the kinesthetic information, the olfactory and gustatory information. People will label their experience using their internal dialogue, or what we call in NLP the self-talk, or the auditory digital digital information. But what a lot of people aren't recognizing, or that they don't often think about, is the fact that we get 11 million bits of information coming into our brain in every single second. And out of those 11 million bits, we will choose 126 bits that we can process in that second. And so the process of the way in which we interpret our information has to do with a bunch of different filters that are at the subconscious level. And so these filters, relate to our values, our belief systems, our value propositions, the way in which we encode our information. And so as we look at some of this information, our values and our beliefs play a huge role in terms of the way that we process that information. Things like the way we chunk information, things around our memories and our experiences from the past also impact that significantly. And there are a bunch of different filters. One of the ones that I want to really hone in on today is the language that we use. And so when we ask canned questions, when we go too far on our scripts, what we do is we don't actually allow for the differences that make the difference as far as language is concerned. And so when those 11 million bits come in through our brain, or through our five senses, we filter them through our filters, and we create an image in our mind that allows us to give meaning to that experience. That meaning often affects our state, which is the way that we feel about it, and then that state impacts our physiology or our body's response to that situation. And so when we have those three things together, that actually produces the behavior that we respond with. Now, you might be thinking, Shondell, what in the world does this have to do with the 7 powerful questions? Well, allow me to enlighten you on that. When we ask questions that are closed questions, or we ask questions that are not quality questions, that they are leading questions, then not only do we not have an opportunity to elicit what's going on for that person in terms of their model of the world, their belief systems, the psychology at which they're approaching the problems, the solutions that they're looking for, we're also potentially not actually eliciting that information that is relevant to us being able to tailor a solution to the person that's in front of us. And so we want to ask really good quality questions. And another thing that it allows us to do when we ask more open-ended questions is that it allows us to actually work out that people have different ways in which they're buying. And so I want to just share with you the multi-pronged strategy that is usually happening as a result of the way in which we interact with people. And this is one of the areas where I think sometimes people struggle to understand why they might have a lot of inquiry, but they're perhaps not getting people across the line, or they might have enthusiasm at the beginning of the sales process, but then not a lot of follow through, or potentially they have someone who's really excited about the buying decision that they've made, but effectively they will struggle to actually keep that person enrolled beyond making that sale. And I often say that when people run out of future goals and future vision, that's when they leave. And so I think that it's really important for you to understand that we have strategies for everything that we do. And in the context of actually interacting with the way in which we connect with people, we actually have 3 parts to a strategy, and that is effectively the motivation to buy something, or the desire to buy something. We have the decision itself that actually takes place, and then we have what we call our reassurance. And so if you've ever bought something, felt really excited about it when you bought it, made the decision to actually buy it, and then you took it home and you utilized it, or you worked with it, or you started playing with the new tool or the new gadget or whatever it was, and suddenly you felt like, oh geez, I've spent all this money on this thing, and now I'm not sure if it's going to get me what I need, or you might be feeling remorseful about the purchase that you've made. That's an example of our reassurance strategy. And you, as the sales professional, or if you're leading a team of sales professionals, you need to be really clear about what it is that is the motivation for your buyer, what is going to bring them to the decision-making process, and then also how can we ensure that our reassurance is stacked up to the point where that person actually has a really clear decision, a really clear congruence about the fact that they've made that decision was the best decision or the best investment, and is clearly going to get them a return on investment. And I think that for a lot of our sales professionals and people who are doing business, our business owners and our founders who are selling, I think sometimes what can happen is we get so caught up on a person's motivation to buy something, we forget about, what's the process for decision. And most importantly, I see many people forget all about the reassurance strategy, and then they wonder why they sign clients on and then they're not happy with their purchase, or they have complaints, or potentially even before the decision takes place, they're getting objections, or they're getting met with barriers and obstacles to actually take that deal further. And one of the things as a resource that I want to share with you guys today in terms of how you can get some some better ideas and some more understanding around this is to actually revisit the pricing psychology workbook that we have, and the resource around that, where we talk about the fact that a lot of the time when people are going out to sell, they often think about and go straight to when they're looking at designing their product and talking about their product, they go straight to the how are we going to do this, what is it, and how much does it cost, when there's some really important factors in terms of, well, why is it that the person is actually engaging with you in the first place? Like, what is their key why, or their drivers, or their desire to actually engage in the solution that you might be offering? When do they need it by? What's the time frames, and what's the expectation around what is it that they're actually looking for? What's the solution? What will it give them? What can they expect? And also a really important part of this process is the who it is that you're selling to, because you might sell a particular product that's aimed at a particular niche within the market. And it might be that your product or service is, applicable to other people in different industries, but perhaps their desire, their buying cues, their motivation strategies to actually buy from you could be a completely different set of strategies. And so the words that we put together, the quality of the questions that we ask, actually helps us to determine that who, which comes back to the client avatar and defining, aligning, and delivering to the audience that has a particular need. And so then we move forward into, how do we design this? And I said a moment ago that, sometimes it's really about the language, and people miss the importance of the language that we use in terms of pacing and leading people to an idea, or eliciting that information and being able to make sense of what does that mean for them. And I think if we come back to this concept around the way that we delete, distort, and generalize information, when we are filtering our information, we generally will delete, distort, and generalize that information to create the perception or the picture of value that we're really looking for. And so we'll delete the things that don't match up with our values or beliefs, or that we don't think are necessary to us. We distort information based on what our experiences to date have already been, and then we generalize. And so for a salesperson who's selling in an industry where potentially they have a lot of competition, or different companies that deliver the same services, or the perceived same services, it can sometimes be challenging to be able to highlight to people what is the most important thing. And many of you are familiar with the fact that we are effectively building rapport and trust with our buyers, and that trust is the basis of everything. Now, I often talk to people about the fact that 93% of building trust in communication is actually to do with our physiology and our tonality. So how do we show up in terms of our physiology? How do we show up in terms of the voice projection, the quality of our voice? All these things make a difference unconsciously to a person in the way in which you interact with them. And only 7% is actually words. However, sometimes the way you say something actually matters. And I had a conversation the other day with a client of mine, and she said, "Oh, Shondell, I love it when you come in to talk to our team, because there's something really special about the way that you articulate information, the way that you share information. And I find that even though sometimes I'm saying roughly the same thing as what you're saying to my team, when you come in and you say it, you're just so articulate, and it seems to be that the way that you deliver that information and the words that you use just have so much more of an impact than I could ever hope to have, and I really want to learn that." And that got me thinking about that. And so I actually want to, as part of you being here today, I want to share with you a workshop that we've got coming up on May the 10th at 9:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So for those of us that might be international, that is Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to be going through our Winning Words workshop. So this is using the power of your language in order to shape your results. And this is really about making sure that you can use the right words at the right time to transform your outcomes, whether it be in your conversations, in your relationships, in your negotiations, in your arguments, and actually, being able to articulate your point of view from a perspective that actually is encouraging, that leads a person to see things from your point of view. And of course, it has a very important application in the way that we do our selling. And so I'd love to invite you to come along to that. If you know that you've been using scripts and dialogues that perhaps aren't getting you the traction that you'd really like to be getting, and you'd like to really work on this area, then I really encourage you to go ahead and use that QR code, or you can go to 3sales.me/events and you'll find it there to register. And even if you can't make the time live, there is an option for you to be able to access the recording. So simply go ahead and register, and we'd love to see you there. So what I really want to do today is I want to share with you the 7 powerful questions that will elicit the responses that you really need. And you probably gathered by now that this is not about canning a conversation and getting yes/no answers from your clients, which effectively give you no information about what is their criteria for buying. And at the end of the day, what I said to you is that people do not want to be sold, but they do want to buy in. And so you've got to give them a reason to buy in. And often the best way to anticipate or to overcome objections is to ensure that you gather the information that you need where the client sells themselves, as opposed to you trying to force them to buy something that they can't see the value or they can't match the need that they have to the value proposition that you're offering. And so we have a number of different questions. I've taken the 7 best that I wanted to share with you today. So let's have a look at these as we go through. So one of the things that we really want to find out when we're dealing with buyers is we want to be able to find out what is their desire and what's the impact that it's going to make. And so you might be selling a service that's going to help them improve their efficiency, or you might be selling a product that's going to impact the morale of their team and their follow through and getting a particular job done. Or you could be delivering a set of tools or a system that's going to assist people in increasing their profitability on the bottom line, or getting more traction with their leads, or whatever it might be. And so from this perspective, whenever you've got somebody in front of you, then we talked about the different parts of the 3-pronged strategy. We've got our motivation to buy, we've got the convincer or the decision that actually gets made, and then the reassurance which happens afterwards, and we want to make sure that we stack all of these things up. And so when we're looking at the desire and the impact, you may think that your product or service is going to make an impact or produce a particular outcome, but that may or may not be of interest to your audience or to the person sitting in front of you. And so whenever I'm in a sales conversation, one of the things that I always like to do is I like to ask our what and our how questions, as opposed to our why questions. And so I might ask somebody, what was it that motivated you to look for a solution like ours, or what's your ultimate desire in terms of the outcome that you're really trying to create here? If we were to implement a solution, what kind of impact would it have, not just on this department, but potentially the business as a whole? If you're selling business to business, obviously that's an important question. If you're selling business to consumer, then you might talk about the importance of, making this decision. What's the impact that it's going to have, not just for you personally, but potentially for family and friends, potentially for the relationships that you have, for your health and fitness. How's it going to impact all of these things? And so the most important thing is to understand what is their key convincer around the desire and the impact. The second question is centered around asking a nice open-ended question around their evidence procedure. Now, I'm going to explain this little piece of jargon here because in NLP we call it an evidence procedure. Basically what that means is what's their measure of excellence in terms of getting a great result. And so when we think about it, what will they see? What will they hear? What will they feel? What will people say to them? What will they say to themselves about the experience that works really well? And I used this question many years ago when I first got into business. I had an important conversation with a very big client. I'd got the opportunity to speak to this person about doing some keynote presentations for a very large multinational company, and I knew that I had a smaller window of time in order to be able to create some enthusiasm, some motivation, and some desire, because I knew that trainers and presenters like myself were calling that organization to work with their team of people nationally all the time. And so one of the key questions that I asked is, when you think about somebody that you've worked with in the past in terms of, excellent training delivery, what were some of the key factors that made it a fantastic training, or what did you see in terms of evidence and feedback that you got from people within the organization about one of the most powerful presenters you ever had, or someone who they experienced not only had an amazing time during the presentation, but also they got great results post presentation. And what was really interesting about that was I was able to elicit from the person what was their evidence procedure and what did they value as part of the process of having an excellent presenter or a trainer. And subsequently, when it was time for me to talk in the meeting, I made sure that I was highlighting those things that were of value to that person that they've told me from their own mouth and from their own evidence procedure. So I think it's really important that you switch the focus from being, what can I give this person, to what's their measure of excellence. So that's our evidence procedure. The third one is about their decision steps or their process steps. And I have a client that I work with who does a lot of tenders, really big acquisitions. And one of the things about that kind of sales process is that there's often multiple stakeholders, or there's multiple decision makers in that process. And certainly for people who have come from a transactional background, they struggle with the idea of looking for ways in which they can really connect with a lot of different people within that organization. And so one of the best things that you can do, and this is what the client does, they ask questions about what is your supply process. So in other words, what does it take in order to get our invoices approved through your organization, so that we can ensure that we are up for being able to do all of those steps in that process. And so it's a really powerful question because it shows interest in the organization's process. And often when I'm coaching people who do this kind of sales and haven't really nailed it yet, they often complain about the fact when they're dealing with government organizations or multinational corporates or big enterprise customers that they struggle with the idea of, one, getting the work and getting to the right decision makers and getting to the right champions within the organization. And secondly, even when they do that, they struggle with getting the remittance of the deal in terms of payment and dealing with their accounts departments, their supply departments, their procurement departments. And so as we look at this, we're saying, what's the process? What's your supply process, or what's your procurement process? Or what does it take in order for us to, what do you do in terms of gathering the stakeholders for the onboarding process? These are open-ended questions which give you insight into the organization. And of course, when it comes time for you to link your value to what it is that you offer, this is valuable information to present to the prospect, showing that you've been able to listen. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I think it's a really important part that I see too many sales professionals go into meetings with organizations, they ask a bunch of questions and then they don't write anything down. So I really want to encourage you that when you write things down, it allows you to stay focused on what the person in front of you is telling you, as opposed to trying to remember all of the things that they've shared with you as being, their key buying strategies. So our next area here that I really want to highlight is the fact that we want to talk about the perception of value and the vision that they have. And so, like I said before, we all have different filters and we've had different experiences that have contributed to our beliefs, our values, the stuff that we think is important to us. And too many people go in and sell with the prospect that, the person sitting in front of them has the same model of the world, that they value the same things, that they've had the same experiences, and that's just not true. And so what we really want to do is ask some really good questions around, what's their vision over the next 6 to 12 months? What is it that they're aiming for? If, one of my favorite questions in the context of personal development is, if I gave you a magic wand and you could create anything you wanted without any boundaries around smarts or resources or money or time or people, or, what would you wave it to create? What do you really want? What is the thing that you're actually looking for? And how would that be valuable to you? Or what would happen if you were able to achieve that? What would be some of the flow-on effects around that? And so I think the perception of value is really important because it's their perception of value, and perception of value is the eye of the beholder. So you might do a really fantastic job delivering something that holds no value in the eyes of the person that you're meeting with. So really important to get in their words, in their information, what is of value to them and what is their vision. The other thing that I think is really important, and this comes back to where we teach strategies in NLP, is their convincer and their motivation. And so when we talk about the convincer and the motivation, this is a set of things that we do. I know that there's a lot of people out there that have different elements of convincers in terms of the way that they do things. And you've probably seen it in the way that you've interacted with your buyers and with your prospects. There are some people that they feel like they might need to have 3 or 4 conversations with you before they are actually convinced that you can help them in the way that they need. And some people, particularly sales professionals in a transactional sense, sometimes what can happen is they'll see these 2 or 3 this request for 2 or 3 meetings, or for them to send more information, or they see that as an objection. And the truth is that it's not always an objection. Sometimes it's the person trying to actualize their convincers. And one thing you really need to know about is the fact that the convincer is closely tied with the reassurance. If you don't have that reassurance, then you might be successful in getting the client across the line, but they may leave after a short period of time, or they may put in a bad review, or they might complain, or they'll tell other people about the fact that they haven't had the experience that they were promised. And I was chatting with a client the other day. She was sold something, it wasn't what was promised, and she said, they sold me the sausage, they sold me the sizzle without any sausage. And I just thought that was absolutely golden. And so when people don't have a great experience, or they're not really convinced of what it is that you're offering matching with the needs, then that can affect the reassurance. And so I think it's really important. In addition to that, the motivation strategy, or the motivation to actually take action. Sometimes if people haven't fulfilled their motivation strategy around the solution that you're offering, and we go straight into getting them to make a decision, we'll often find that they don't connect to the sales pitch, or they don't connect to the offer that we're producing for them, because the motivation is not strong enough to buy. Maybe the problem or the pain point is not clear in their eyes, in which case it's our job to be able to ask those good quality questions that help us to understand what's the real impact of this, what are the pains, what are the gains, and what are they doing currently to avoid that pain versus what are they wanting to do to actually create that gain. And I think that's a really important part of the way that we ask questions, which leads us to the reassurance. So how would you know that we did a good job? What are some of the key elements? So this is another question that you can ask. How would you know that we did a great job? What are some of the key elements around the way that we deliver that would have you know that we absolutely nailed all the problems down and created solutions to those problems? And certainly, what would we need to deliver to you? Is it something that we would show you? Is it something that we would tell you about? Is it something that you would experience? Sometimes you can offer those as options and suggestions if the client's not really sure. Often our clients and our prospects haven't been asked these good quality questions. They're too used to being funneled into canned questions or closed mentalities that really only serve the salesperson and not the buyer. And so I guarantee you that if you use these 7 quality questions to elicit this important information from your prospects and your buyers, then what's going to happen is you're going to stand out from your competitors. It is the difference that makes the difference. And if you really want to move away from those canned scripts and feeling like you need to follow a methodology of what to say at the right time, you want to create some winning words, then I really want to encourage you to come along and join us for our winning words workshop. Remember that you may not be able to attend live. There is a recording available to purchase ahead of time. All you need to do is simply register, and then you can get the confirmation of that so that you can still get access to the information. So everyone, I really want to highlight here today that at the end of the day, there may be a very competitive, it may be that you're working in a very competitive market, and that's totally fine, because at the end of the day, the reason that we are here is to be able to stack the value in the eyes of our prospects and our buyers. And one of the things that's certainly going to make you stand out from the crowd is your ability to ask great quality questions, to really respect the intelligence of your buyer, and as you elicit that information, to then tailor your solution to the things that are really front and center for the person in front of you. And if you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, then of course you want to do this by finding your champion in the organization, and certainly asking those amazing quality questions, and finding out who are the stakeholders that potentially will influence that deal is another really quality question that we can ask as part of their decision process and their procurement process. So I trust that this has been useful in terms of being able to find out what do your buyers really want, and how can you be compelling in your message without being one of those sleazy, icky sales people who just really go in there and slam the person with all the interesting points about you and your company. Let's start getting interested in the people that we're interacting with, really respecting their intelligence and creating win-win outcomes for all. So until we meet again, it's Shondell from Life Puzzle. Be well and be empowered. Bye for now, guys.